Hello everyone, this is Robin Hattersley from Campus Safety Magazine. We just wrapped up our first ever Campus Safety Online Summit and have received rave reviews from our attendees. More than 700 university, school, hospital, and corporate public safety, security, and emergency management professionals from all across North America tuned into our online presentations to learn about everything from active shooter response to weather plans, grants and funding, travel safety, situational awareness, workplace violence, and more. The feedback from our attendees about our presentations was so positive that we wanted to share with you some of the highlights from this event. So, here are the top 10 takeaways from this year's Campus Safety Online Summit. The threat of active shooters is one of the top concerns of many campus security professionals. But the truth of the matter about mass casualty tragedies is that a whole host of other weapons, such as knives, vehicles, and bombs, could also be used in these attacks. That's why many in law enforcement now call these types of mass casualty events active killer attacks. We asked New Mexico State University Police Chief Stephen Lopez to present how unarmed security officers can respond to active killer situations. In this highlight from his presentation, Chief Lopez discusses the pros and cons of having security officers at the scene of an incident.
There are also a number of advantages to having security personnel at or near the scene of an attack, which all of our participants, of course, already know. Clearly, security personnel should be very familiar with the facility or facilities that they are working in and be able to get people out back doors or into secure rooms quickly. Security personnel are also more likely to be able to spot things in advance, such as someone who may be conducting pre-attack surveillance on the location. Many of the attacks that have taken place across the United States have had at least one incident leading up to the attack where the attacker was seen by somebody there earlier on, either a day or days and weeks in advance of the actual attack. Security personnel also are likely to be able to spot early stages of an attack, such as an individual approaching with suspicious devices or weapons, particularly shoulder-mounted weapons. When giving directions to others in the area, there tends to be a recognition that security personnel are authority figures, and that helps speed up reactions by bystanders as well. Every second saved in getting people to react and leave or shelter can be a life saved. So this quick recognition of that authority status can be very helpful, and that's why going back to a command presence is something that all security personnel should have, both by wearing a uniform and by being able to use good voice commands and presence. It's also important to recognize that security professionals are usually in the career because they want to help and make a difference. It usually isn't because they expect a big paycheck. As all of us know, that's simply not what comes with the job. So this desire to be helpful and to make a difference can be translated into action in dire situations. But again, the security personnel need to have the necessary training and equipment in advance to be able to do that, even if the equipment doesn't involve a firearm. Now, along with disadvantages come a number of disadvantages. Chief among them is that, unfortunately, as we mentioned near the beginning, security personnel may be among the first targets during an active killer incident. Because they are seen as authority figures, attackers may start the attack by trying to eliminate those who might be able to stop them. In addition, security personnel are likely to be stationed in areas where they can uncover the attack, such as entryways, checkpoints, bag search tables, magnetometers, etc. Attackers are likely to have to take action at these locations as their discovery of the attack is imminent as they start to approach or go through these checkpoints. For security personnel who are unarmed, obviously a limitation is that they don't have a firearm to use to respond, at least not initially. However, we encourage all security officers, even those who are unarmed, to be familiar with firearms in the event that they may have an opportunity to pick one up and use it. When we train our security staff at New Mexico State University, we do so right alongside with our police officers and our armed security, so they at least have a good fundamental understanding of what the armed personnel can and should do in the likelihood that they may step into that same role. They won't have the same proficiency, obviously, or same familiarity, but there may be that opportunity that presents itself. And depending on the agency, security personnel may also have limited communications with responding officers. While direct radio communication is great, for many locations and security offices, this is simply not possible. It's something that should be addressed prior to an incident by trying to work with local agencies, but especially in larger areas, it's simply not going to be practical for all security officers to have direct radio communication with local law enforcement. However, keep in mind that even in areas where there is direct radio communication with the local agencies, that doesn't mean that security personnel have direct radio communication with everybody who's responding. These type of incidents bring forth a large number of local, state, and federal assets, and it's simply not practical to have and use a single radio channel to coordinate the entire response. So all security personnel and even officers who are responding to these large incidents are going to be faced with this same limitation of communication. And one final limitation that we need to mention is that some police officers simply do not understand the critical role that security professionals play in our society. Sometimes this is a result of a lack of education or understanding, and unfortunately sometimes it's the result of egos. I've seen this firsthand and have also witnessed the transformation that can take place when officers learn about what security can do for them and start to trust and rely on security personnel during responses. Now, this does take time and effort, but it's something that should be done well in advance of an emergency because it does take time. For those who don't have this type of relationship with local law enforcement, I encourage you to reach out and start that discussion by asking what role or roles your personnel can perform at a scene to help free up officers so they can focus on tasks that the officers need to.
Campus protection pros who attended the summit gained a new understanding and appreciation of the role that security officers play in responding to incidents of all kinds, but particularly to active killer attacks. In this segment, Chief Lopez discusses their specific roles and duties when these events happen.
Now, when we start talking about the roles during an attack, we've already mentioned a few of those. It's important to keep in mind that number one role that a security officer needs to keep in mind at the forefront is they need to protect themselves. If the security officer goes down as a casualty, they can't do anything else that we're going to be talking about. So that personal safety is absolutely important. Again, notifying others that the attack is underway is crucial. That starts with notifying people who are in the immediate area so they can run, hide, whatever the protocol is for that area, as well as notifying the emergency responders who need to get that response time clock moving. Now, one of the roles that we really encourage security to discuss with local law enforcement is how to direct responding units to the attacker. We didn't understand how crucial this can be until we actually started doing full-scale exercises and realized that when officers are dispatched to a location based simply on 911 calls coming from the general public, location information is usually not as precise as we would like for it to be. It is great when we were able to have security personnel on the scene who, as responding officers came in, were able to point out he's over in that particular building. And when we talk especially about universities that are large campuses, that narrowing down from a possibility of 200 buildings down to a single building saves a lot of time. Even better is if the security officer can say, he's over in that particular wing, because that narrows down the amount of time that we have to search. Police officers that are trained in active shooter response are being trained to go in listening for the sounds of gunfire. But the reality is gunfire does not take place throughout the entire incident. So if the security officer can narrow it down and say he was last seen in that hallway or last seen in that wing on the first floor, and I've been in a position where I know he has not left that area, that allows officers to respond and start looking for that threat immediately rather than having to spend a lot of time clearing parts of a building or buildings on a campus that are not of high priority. Security personnel can also help people who are trapped or injured, and that obviously goes without saying. We've seen a lot of cases of that in incidents that have played out where being able to help get people out of an area where they're trapped, or by helping people who are injured and treating those life-threatening injuries. It can be done by security staff. And we've seen just with what happened in Orlando, security personnel can provide crucial information for investigators as the incident plays out, either while it's still underway or during the investigative phase afterwards. And that can be very important in helping identify how things happened, why things happened. And finally, for a company, a campus, a university, they need to have some type of liaison with local law enforcement, and the security officers can provide that crucial liaison role. There's going to have to be a huge exchange of information going back and forth. And security professionals are uniquely positioned to know who on both sides are the key people in order to get that information moving.
Not only did the Campus Safety Online Summit cover the roles of unarmed security personnel during active killer incidents, it also reviewed how students and staff should respond during these ordeals. In his Campus Lockdown and Shelter in Place, Planning Your First Exercises presentation, Biola University Campus Safety Chief John Ojaskoba discusses the initial steps campuses can take to conduct their exercises and drills effectively. In this segment, the Chief talks about the importance of door locks, emergency notification systems, emergency building coordinators, and procedures and training for students and staff so that they will respond appropriately during an incident.
The time apparatus include a combination of systems, procedures, and personnel. What I will highly recommend is that before you dive deep into your exercise planning process, conduct an assessment to really determine what you have in place. Is there a door lock system in place? If you rely on an electronic lockdown system only, you want to ask yourself a question: how frequently do you test the system, and will that system be ready when you conduct your exercise? What kind of emergency communication system do you have in place? Is it a text and email-based system? Do you have a public address system? If you do have a public address system, is it indoor public address system or outdoor public address system? Regardless of what emergency notification system you have in place, again, how frequently do you test the system, and will this system be ready when you conduct your exercise? What I have discovered from experience here is that emergency building coordinators can really come in handy during a major crisis situation, because we all know that we do not have enough officers to be present in every single campus building. So the key here is, do you have an emergency building coordinator inside each campus building? If yes, do you have procedures in place? Do they understand their roles? Roles can be as simple as giving them instructions on how to usher people inside a building. The most common complaint from students after an incident is, I did not know what to do. So you might want to assess your campus and find out if you have procedures in place for students and employees. It's one thing to have procedures in place for employees and students. It's another thing to get them to be well-versed on these procedures.
When it comes to students, getting them to take responsibility for their own safety can be a challenge. And we all know that our messages won't be effective if no one pays attention to them. In this highlight from How to Empower Students and Faculty to Take Ownership of Safety on and Off Campus, Ann Yatch of Atomic Learning describes the two student personality types and how to engage them so they'll take your safety and security communications seriously.
I'd like to talk about the underlying aspect of individual personalities that can come up when talking about personal safety in this difficult key student demographic. As I've worked with students, there are two personalities that seem to emerge when it comes to this topic of personal safety. And while it's especially common among high school seniors and college freshmen, these two personality types often carry forward into many other adult groups as well. The first group is what I call the invincible students. Those are the ones that we all know, they have the attitude of, this would never happen to me, and if it did, I would figure it out or I would be just fine. The other group exhibits what I refer to as a hopeful mentality. They don't have an answer to the what if. What would I do if this happened? So they simply push that fear or that concern to the back of their mind, and they hope that it doesn't happen to them. Now, both types of students decide not to pay attention to the topic of campus safety for different reasons, but it's really important to know that these two mindsets coming into the equation exist. To engage this pretty challenging demographic and these more difficult personality types, and then also to try to spark action, we found that you have to address the root cause of their disengagement. And there are 3 root causes that we found over the years. They don't have any interest in the topic, or perhaps they don't even want to think about it because it isn't typically fun or interesting. The second one, they believe that they don't have the power on their own to solve the problem anyway. So why should they bother taking the time to learn more? The third, everything that they've learned up to this point in their lives is typically about definitions, so they don't have a reason to think about something further to create a plan. In fact, they don't comprehend that a plan is necessary. So if a program fails to address the 2 distinct personality types that I just mentioned, if a program fails to address the 3 root causes of disengagement, then the program won't be as effective.
So Anne, considering all that you've shared, how do we effectively reach today's learners?
That is an awesome question. While many of us have a lot of firsthand experience working with young adults and we understand why this demographic is so challenging, I really want to reiterate several key demographic issues we all face so that we're all on the same page before we move into that strategy to reach them. If everyone will just give me a few moments. There are 5 main things I wanted to mention. Number 1, these students want to do everything on their own time when they have time in their schedule to learn. Number 2, they really only want to learn something if they believe it's directly relevant and cool. And number 3, the voice of the content has to be male-female, and it has to connect and be respected. Number 4, they want to learn digitally, they want to practice digitally, they want to discuss digitally because they're constantly online. Even when they're bored, they're going right online. Number 5, they need content that is really quick hitting and time sensitive so that they can speak to everyone in the challenging demographic, plus all the non-traditional students.
Another important component of campus public safety, security, and emergency management, particularly at K-12 schools, is how to effectively reunite students with their parents once an emergency is over. In this highlight from Parent-Child Reunification After the Crisis, Safeguard Risk Solutions CEO and President Gary Segrist Jr. describes the supplies and location needed so that the reunification process will go as smoothly as possible.
So at your district service center or building administration, your property services, you should have go bags, go kits for reunification. And what you're going to be able to do then is have all of your materials in one place so that if there's an event that happens at an elementary school, all of these things needed for the reunification will be brought. You're going to need to have signage, you're going to need to have tables, you're going to need to have student information that's normally in your student information system. You may need to have generators. You're going to have to traffic signs so that parents know which way to go. Alphabet cards so that parents can line up, and everything must be clearly marked so that there's no confusion as to where parents are supposed to be during the process in order to get their child. So as we can see here, again, this is from the I Love You Guys Foundation. The greeters direct the parents to the reunification area. They line up, they complete the reunification card. If they need assistance, you'll have to have people there that can help them. And then greeters verify custody in case the parent does not have an ID. Again, you don't want to have to explain to your parents that they can't pick up their child because they didn't know they were supposed to bring an ID. This should be communicated before there's an event. This should also be communicated through your mass notification system during the event so parents know what to bring. Now, the I Love You Guys Foundation recommends that there's what they call a kid herd area where students may be. They recommend having movies for the students to watch. I would say that this is probably unreasonable just due to the technology. Yes, back when I first started teaching, there might have been something such as a 16 millimeter projector that could have been projected on a wall. But in most cases, you just want to keep the students comfortable. plenty of teacher supervision, orderly, so that the kids can just patiently wait for their parents. Please understand that the students in the upper grades will be texting their parents. That's understandable. That's why you need to have plenty of adult supervision so that we can control the reunification process. Once the parents have checked in, that's when runners will go get the child, reunify them with their parents. Notice in this diagram that on the lower left-hand side, it's showing that you need to have an area for crisis counselors. If there was a traumatic event, even just a mass casualty incident where a lot of students were injured due to a bleacher collapse, that will be traumatic for some children, so your crisis intervention team will need to be on hand to help with those children and also to guide parents if additional counseling is needed outside of the school setting.
Not only did the Campus Safety Online Summit cover how schools, universities, hospitals, and businesses should respond once an incident happens, it also highlighted the indicators that someone might act out. In this highlight from Workplace Violence in Healthcare, Training Program Considerations, Brian Warren, who is President and Chief Consultant for WarSec Security, describes how to identify behaviors that could lead to violence. In this session, which also applies to schools, universities, and the business world, he also discusses how to avoid inadvertently escalating a situation, as well as how to de-escalate verbal aggression.
So one of the first things that we want to focus on when we're looking at any type of workplace violence prevention recognition program are the behavior identification training. For example, many people, when they're upset, they will attempt to intimidate another person to simply win the confrontation. They don't want to physically fight, but they will give some physical warning signs, and we should make sure that all of our coworkers in healthcare are aware of these warning signs and they know how to interpret them properly. For example, some of the physical warning changes that a person may exhibit when they're upset include a flushed face, excessive hand waving or finger pointing, a very semantic, very animated gestures, clenched fist, or perhaps they bite down, a clenched jaw, muscle tension, direct prolonged eye contact, the stare, right, the 1,000-yard stare, deep and rapid breathing that is not indicative of the type of physical exertion. In other words, I'm not exerting myself, but my breathing pattern has changed dramatically. I'm now huffing and puffing and breathing much, much deeper. Or if a person moves into your personal space, and typically in the United States, that means closer than 3 feet. This can certainly change based upon cultural norms. This is certainly not true in every country. Many countries do not have the same personal space that we in the United States have. So let's talk a little bit about personal space so everyone understands what I'm referring to. Typically, in the United States, we have several zones that when we approach someone, whether we know them or not, or how well we know them, we have comfort levels based upon the physical proximity that person is to us. For example, a typical public distance, as seen on this slide, is 8 to 10 feet. Even if we're not familiar with one another, if you are at least 8 to 10 feet away from me, you typically don't present a threat. Unfortunately, in today's society, I'm probably looking at my phone and I'm not even paying attention to you. And so there's no acknowledgement there. When you move into social distance, and that's 4 to 8 feet, that is typical the distance in healthcare. We typically train, acknowledge the person, nod to them, perhaps give them a greeting, and that's just good customer service training. So that's considered social distance. Anything less than 4 feet is considered either personal distance or within 18 inches, intimate distance. We reserve personal and intimate distance for people that we are familiar with, that we like, that we invite into that space. However, as a clinical provider of care, think about this. How often do our nurses, our physicians, our other care team members have to violate a patient's personal space in order to do simple basic diagnostics? I have to touch you to put a blood pressure cuff on you. I have to touch you to take your temperature. So again, we are violating a person's personal space with no malice. However, if we don't explain our actions and if we're not paying attention to some of the physical warning signs that the patient may be exhibiting, we could in fact be escalating the situation and turning it into a workplace violence event. Let's move on to verbal aggression. We've talked a little bit about some of the physiological changes and some of the things we need to look at as far as physical changes. But a person will also exhibit some verbal behaviors. When a person is screaming, yelling, often using very disrespectful terms, a good technique is let them vent. Let them get it out of their system. Again, within reason, don't let it turn into a physical altercation, but sometimes it's better to let a person go than try to interrupt them, which unfortunately escalates the situation and may drive them toward more of a physical contact. Be assertive in verbal communication. You can be very respectful, but you can also be assertive. Use a person's name frequently. This helps create a rapport between you and the person, and hopefully it calms them down because it personalizes you to them and them to you. Try to remain composed and use even, steady tone. Take some deep breaths yourselves. Calm your own nerves, because if you aren't calm, you'll never be able to calm another person. And you can set and enforce some reasonable limits. For example, if you have a patient that is constantly coming up out of the bed, there is nothing wrong with saying, "Listen, Mr. Jones, you have to sit on the bed or we can't provide you the treatment. Please sit down. I'll be back in a moment." That is a reasonable limit that we need to teach our people it's okay to do. And if possible, if the person is just very, very upset and we are fearful that they are going to turn this into an actual workplace violence assault, we need to teach some techniques on how to redirect a person's anger, or come up with a way that you can extricate from the situation and go get help without causing the person to become more angry.
Not only must campuses deal with security issues, they must also address the safety issues associated with weather, such as tornadoes, lightning, high winds, excessive heat, winter storms, and more. In this segment, from Before Weather Strikes, Creating Effective Weather Plans, Dr. Kevin Klasel, who is director of Oklahoma University's Office of Emergency Preparedness, discusses the need to consider who will be affected by weather and their ability to evacuate when preparing your weather plans.
Different types of audiences take a different amount of time to evacuate from various fairs, venues, or other events on your campus. Have ways of, and I'll use our graduation, for example. Our graduation event is outdoor in our football stadium, but I guarantee you the emergency weather plan has to be different. And you guys know that. The types of folks that come to a graduation are very different than the types of folks that come to a football game. And if it takes grandma 17 minutes to get up 22 steps or 22 rows in the stadium, you have to account for that in an evacuation sense as well. So in some cases, we may be even more conservative with a graduation ceremony, just given the age demographic against approaching storms, approaching lightning, and the like. We might also think about how we do things differently with respect to cooling stations or having water available.
Liability vulnerabilities are another concern when a campus is developing its weather plans. In this segment, Dr. Klasel covers the need for campuses to create decision trigger charts. Developing these documents will help protect your institution from lawsuits should an adverse incident happen.
Create a decision trigger chart. A decision trigger chart will be your best friend if anything ever happens on your campus, because it will show that you thought about the risk, you had a plan for the risk, you had an implementation for a decision, and those cases will always help you if something came about after the fact in terms of legal action. In many cases, you have legal protection if you have thought about a risk, planned for the risk, executed your plan according to that risk, rather than just winging it in the end.
One of the most challenging issues for any type of campus is drug use, particularly when it involves a vape pen. Vape pens are not illegal, so how can campus public safety personnel, teachers, staff, and administrators identify when a vape pen is being used illegally for drugs? To find out, Campus Safety Online Summit attendees viewed Managing the Vape Trend. Are drugs being used in plain sight on your campus? This presentation featured Officer Jermaine Galloway of Tall Cop Says Stop. In this highlight from his presentation, Officer Galloway shows what marijuana products such as dabs, wax, oil, crumbler, shatter, and BHO look like when they go into a vape pen.
So this is what it's going to look like. When you talk about products that are going to go into the vape pen, this is what it's going to look like. We call this dabs. We call it wax. You'll hear people say oil. You'll hear them say crumble. So go over some of those again. Oil, crumble, wax. You'll hear people say earwax. I've even heard kids say boogers, like boogers out of your nose. I've heard them reference it as that. There's multiple different things that they will say. BHO is a big one. That stands for butane honey oil or butane hash oil. You'll hear them reference shatter, which is this one you're looking at here. Shatter is more like little shards. It's very potent THC. Your shatter is going to be higher THC content. And all of this stuff works in vapes. All of these products work in vapes, okay?
Our final takeaway highlights the other paraphernalia associated with vape pens, such as dabber tools. Officer Galloway also shows what vape pens and their parts look like.
Now, I need to give you a couple things here because when we talk about identifying vapes, and I mentioned earlier, what's the hook that people see? These are called dabber tools. They look like dental tools, and they look all different types, but generally they're titanium or glass, and they have a scooper or scraper or pointy end on them. We are seeing some of these actually sold with vape pens. You're seeing dabber tools that are being sold with vape pens, okay? So with this particular one right here, this is just a good photo of a dabber tool for you guys in schools, especially my high school folks who are online. In my trainings, you guys are giving me a lot of feedback on these that you're running into these quite a bit. In some cases, you didn't know what they were. I strongly encourage you to be training your staff on what these little devices actually are because they're popular in schools. So this is what dabber tools also looks like. This one comes with a keychain. So this one actually is sold with a vape pen and is made to attach to your keychain. This is why also some of you guys are seeing butane actually being sold in your shopping malls, in your convenience stores at the counter next to marijuana pipes. One of the shopping malls I was at in the Midwest recently had it sold right next to stash compartments. Actually, two different ones had it next to stash compartments, including this photo you're looking at right here. So this is on the one on the left. So this is stuff that you're seeing, and this is kind of why. This is some of the popularity of why you're seeing that. Now, so we talked about real quickly some of the stuff that goes into the vape pens, okay? So let's kind of talk about some of the pens directly. Your vape pens, generally, and again, we can't speak absolutes for everything, but generally your vape pens consist of three parts. And I'll show you it here in the next slide. A mouthpiece is part one, a tank slash bowl slash atomizer, okay? So your tank or your heating element or also your bowl are kind of one and the same. That's part two, and then usually about half the pen is just a battery, and that's part three. Now, to turn the pen on, you're going to see an on-off switch. I'll show it to you here in the next photo. You press it 5 times consecutively, turns it on. Do the same thing, it turns it off. And you'll usually see it blink, and then, you know, they make nice little funky colors that you can see and all that stuff. So you'll be able to tell what it looks like. So when you look at this one here, this three-part pen, you actually see a battery on the left, kind of bottom right corner, you see the bowl, and inside there is going to be your heating element that you can't see, but I'll show you here in a minute. And then you see a mouthpiece in the top right corner. So this is all one pin that just kind of, you just push it in. It just all connects. Some pins can pull apart. Some pins you have to twist apart. If you look at this bowl, it looks like it's just a bad photo, but it's not. There's wax all around there, right? Where it says bowl, there's wax all on the inside and all on the outside, okay? So I'll talk to you about that also. Why are these things popular? Pretty simple, guys. They're discreet and they're mobile. One thing I explain to people is this. In the old days, you're driving up some curvy road within your state and you're trying to smoke marijuana out of a glass pipe. You load the bowl and you use your lighter and you try to smoke, you're going to have a hard time doing it because it's a really curvy road. You need to hang onto the steering wheel with one hand. You're going to have a really hard time. With a vape pen, though, it's just like you're changing your stereo. You don't even have to look down. You don't even have to look away. With one hand, you can take a hit. Here's the problem. That hit of the vape pen is going to be 30 to 90 THC, where the hit of the pipe would have been 10, 12, 15% THC. So remember, when you talk about the impairment and why you're seeing some impairment go up, I mean, there's a direct correlation with all of these things. I'm not saying this is the only reason, but it sure as heck is not reducing what is going on. Okay.
So there you have our top 10 takeaways. Although we listed 10 here, there were many, many more. Too many to mention, in fact. But if you missed our summit, don't worry. You can still get all of the valuable information and tips featured at the Campus Safety Online Summit by registering for our All Access Pass. When you register, you'll get lifetime access to 18 of the country's top security professionals featured in the 2017 Campus Safety Online Summit. You'll be able to refer to this information again and again, anytime you want, and share these tried and tested practices with your colleagues. Other topics covered include grants and funding, hospital security, travel safety, situational awareness, corporate security, workplace violence, video surveillance, radiological security, after-school emergencies, and more. For more information, visit campussafety.ehmedia.co/get-all-access. Thanks for watching and stay safe.